14 years ago, CIA operative Mary Collins vanished without a trace during a classified mission in Southeast Asia, leaving behind a devastated husband, 2 young children, and the intelligence community that would never be the same. At just 35 years old, Mary was one of the agency's most skilled operatives, fluent in 6 languages, trained in advanced surveillance techniques, and trusted with the most sensitive operations in the volatile regions of Thailand and Myanmar. Before we continue, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Here we reopen archived cases with respect and evidence. On October 23, 2010, Mary Collins checked into the Grand Palace Hotel in Bangkok under the cover identity of Sarah Mitchell, a freelance journalist researching human trafficking routes along the Thai-Myanmar border. Her mission briefing indicated she would maintain contact every 48 hours using encrypted satellite communication. The last confirmed signal from Agent Collins came at 11:47 p.m. local time on October 25th, a routine check-in that simply stated, "Proceeding as planned, next contact in 48. That next contact never came. Her disappearance plunged her family into unimaginable tragedy. Her husband, Robert Collins, a State Department analyst, was left to raise their 8-year-old daughter, Emma, and 6-year-old son, Michael, alone. The children were told their mother was working overseas for months, as Robert held on to hope that Mary would walk through their Arlington, Virginia front door with that familiar smile and stories of another successful mission. But as weeks turned to months, the devastating reality set in. The CIA's search and recovery team scoured Bangkok's underground networks, questioned informants, and followed every lead through the maze of Southeast Asian criminal organizations. They considered every possibility: kidnapping by foreign intelligence services, capture by human traffickers she was investigating, even the unthinkable scenario that she had defected. Despite deploying their most advanced surveillance technology and calling in favors from allied intelligence services across the region, the agency found nothing. No ransom demands, no body, no witnesses. Mary Collins had simply vanished into the shadows of a city where people disappear every day. The case was officially classified as missing presumed dead after 18 months of intensive investigation, but the Collins family never accepted that conclusion. Robert Collins, consumed by grief and determination, spent every penny of their savings hiring private investigators, traveling to Thailand on his own desperate search missions, and pressuring his contacts within the intelligence community to keep looking. The years of uncertainty transformed their home from a place of laughter into a shrine of unanswered questions, where Mary's coffee mug remained on the kitchen counter and her side of the bed stayed untouched, as if she might return at any moment from her longest mission yet. The Collins household became a testament to suspended grief, a family learning to live with an absence that felt more like an open wound than a memory. Robert Collins, once a confident State Department analyst who briefed senators on Southeast Asian policy, found himself unable to concentrate on classified documents that once seemed so important. His colleagues watched as the sharp, decisive man they knew gradually became hollow-eyed and distracted, jumping every time his secure phone rang, hoping against hope for news that never came. 8-year-old Emma Collins began having nightmares about a faceless woman calling her name from far away. School counselors noted her declining grades and social withdrawal, but how do you explain to a child that her mother didn't abandon her? She simply vanished while fighting monsters most people don't know exist. Emma's teachers described her as an old soul carrying burdens too heavy for her small shoulders. 6-year-old Michael developed an imaginary friend he called Mommy's Voice, conversations he claimed to have with Mary during his afternoon naps. Child psychologists assured Robert this was normal processing behavior, but late at night, Robert would stand outside Michael's door listening to his son's whispered conversations, wondering if grief had made them both lose touch with reality. The intelligence community, bound by classification protocols, could offer the family no real answers. Mary's CIA handler, Director Sarah Chen, made monthly visits to the Collins home for the first year, each time delivering the same devastating message: "We're still looking, but there's nothing new to report." These visits gradually became quarterly, then biannual until they stopped altogether. Robert's sister Patricia moved from Seattle to help care for the children, witnessing firsthand how the family navigated holidays and birthdays with an empty chair at the table. Christmas became particularly brutal, Mary had always been the one who made their house magical during the holidays, staying up until 3 a.m. wrapping presents and preparing elaborate treasure hunts for the children. The financial strain was crushing. Robert's State Department salary, once comfortable for a family of 4, barely covered the costs of childcare, therapy sessions, and his obsessive trips to Thailand. He sold Mary's car, then her jewelry, finally taking out a second mortgage on their Arlington home to fund another private investigation firm that promised connections in Bangkok's underground. Friends and colleagues began to whisper that Robert needed to move on and think about the children's future. But Robert Collins had become a man possessed by questions that burned through his thoughts every waking moment. Was Mary being held somewhere? Was she trying to escape? Was she already dead, or was she fighting to come home to them? As the second anniversary of Mary's disappearance approached, Robert had begun making peace with the possibility that he might never know the truth. The children were adapting to their new reality, and perhaps it was time for him to do the same. He had even started seeing Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a grief counselor who specialized in families affected by government service tragedies. But some mysteries refused to stay buried, and some missing persons refused to stay silent. 2 years, 4 months, and 17 days after Mary Collins vanished, a signal emerged from the darkness that would shatter everything the intelligence community thought they knew about her disappearance. On February 14, 2013, Valentine's Day, a cruel irony that wasn't lost on Robert Collins, the National Security Agency's Signals Intelligence Station in Hawaii detected something extraordinary buried within routine radio chatter from Southeast Asia. It was Morse code, ancient analog communication in an age of satellite encryption and digital protocols. But this wasn't random noise, it was a pattern, repeated 3 times over 6-minute intervals, broadcasting on a frequency known only to CIA operatives with the highest security clearances. SOS Mary Collins, alive help. The message originated from somewhere in the dense jungles near the Thai-Myanmar border, an area so remote that satellite imagery showed nothing but green canopy for hundreds of square miles. When NSA technicians first flagged the transmission, they assumed it was either a sophisticated hoax or a training exercise gone wrong. But when they ran the signal against archived CIA communication protocols, their blood ran cold. The transmission included authentication codes that Mary Collins had memorized during her final training session at The Farm, CIA's covert training facility in Virginia. These weren't codes written down anywhere or stored in any database. They existed only in the minds of operatives trained to use them if every other communication method failed. Director Sarah Chen received the call at 3:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Years later, she would describe that moment as feeling like I'd been struck by lightning. The woman who had made those painful visits to the Collins family, who had gradually transitioned Mary's case from active investigation to administrative closure, suddenly found herself staring at evidence that one of her operatives might still be alive after more than 2 years in captivity. The implications were staggering. If Mary Collins was alive, what had happened to her? Who was holding her and why? Had she been captured by a foreign intelligence service and slowly broken down until she revealed those authentication codes? Or had she been imprisoned by criminals who had no idea what kind of asset they possessed? Within hours, the CIA's Special Activities Division was mobilizing resources that had been dormant since Mary's case went cold. Satellite reconnaissance was redirected to the transmission's point of origin. Deep cover operatives in Thailand and Myanmar were activated for the first time in months. The agency's most sophisticated signal tracking technology was deployed to monitor for any additional transmissions, but the most difficult call Director Chen had to make was to Robert Collins. At 6:15 a.m., as Robert was making breakfast for Emma and Michael before school, his secure phone rang with the distinctive tone that meant CIA business, the same phone that had delivered nothing but disappointing updates for more than 2 years. "Robert, this is Sarah. I need you to sit down. We've received a signal. We think it might be from Mary." The silence on the phone lasted nearly 30 seconds. When Robert finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Is she alive? We don't know yet. But someone using her authentication codes is asking for help." For the Collins family, February 14, 2013, would mark the end of their period of grieving acceptance and the beginning of a new kind of hell. The torture of hope reborn, and the terrifying question of what Mary Collins had endured during her 28 months in the shadows of Southeast Asia. The investigation that intelligence officials thought was over had only just begun. The CIA's Langley headquarters transformed overnight into a nerve center of desperate activity. Conference Room 7A, the same sterile space where Mary Collins' case had been officially closed 18 months earlier, now buzzed with the urgency of an active rescue operation. Wall-mounted screens displayed satellite imagery of the Thai-Myanmar border region, while technicians worked around the clock monitoring radio frequencies for any additional transmissions. Director Sarah Chen assembled what she privately called Mary's Last Stand Team, a collection of the agency's most experienced Southeast Asia operatives, signals intelligence specialists, and psychological operations experts. The team included Agent Marcus Webb, who had worked alongside Mary during her training at the farm, Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, a psychiatrist specializing in long-term captivity scenarios, and Colonel James Harrison, a Special Forces veteran with extensive experience in jungle rescue operations. The psychological profile they constructed painted a disturbing picture. If Mary Collins had indeed survived 28 months in captivity, the woman they might eventually recover would bear little resemblance to the confident operative who had disappeared in Bangkok. Dr. Reeves briefed the team on the likely effects of prolonged isolation, potential torture, and the psychological warfare tactics commonly employed by criminal organizations in the region. "We need to prepare for the possibility that Agent Collins may not trust us," Dr. Reeves explained to the assembled team. "Extended captivity often creates complex psychological bonds between captives and captors. She may not want to be rescued, or she may not believe rescue is possible." Meanwhile, in Arlington, Virginia, Robert Collins found himself thrust back into a nightmare he thought was ending. The phone calls from Langley resumed with disturbing intensity. CIA security specialists swept his house for listening devices and installed new communication equipment. Emma and Michael, now 10 and 8 years old, watched in confusion as their home once again became a command center focused on their missing mother. The children had spent 2 years learning to live without Mary. Emma had stopped asking when Mommy was coming home, and Michael's conversations with Mommy's voice had gradually faded. Now suddenly their father was crying again, taking mysterious phone calls at all hours, and speaking in hushed, urgent tones about new developments and active operations. Robert's sister Patricia, who had sacrificed her own life in Seattle to help raise the children, watched her brother transform back into the obsessed man she remembered from the first year of Mary's disappearance. The grief counselor, Dr. Martinez, warned that this renewed hope could be more psychologically devastating than accepting Mary's death had been. 3 days after the first transmission, the NSA detected a second signal. This one was different, longer, more complex, and transmitted on a frequency that suggested the sender had access to more sophisticated equipment. The decoded message sent shockwaves through the intelligence community. Held by Zhang Syndicate, Golden Triangle Human Trafficking Network, Stop American Operatives Compromised, Stop Trust, No One Local Contacts, Stop Time Running Out Stop. The Zhang Syndicate was a name that made even seasoned CIA operatives uncomfortable. Led by the enigmatic Zhang Wei, a former Chinese military intelligence officer turned crime lord, the organization controlled vast territories along the Myanmar-Thailand-Laos border. They were involved in everything from heroin trafficking to organ harvesting, operating with a level of sophistication that rivaled many government agencies. But the most chilling part of Mary's message was the phrase, "American operatives compromised." If her intelligence was accurate, it meant that someone within the U.S. intelligence community, possibly someone who had worked on her original case, had been feeding information to her captors. Agent Marcus Webb, who had been Mary's training partner and had volunteered for 3 separate search missions in the months after her disappearance, found himself questioning everyone he had trusted. The possibility that Mary's capture hadn't been random, that she had been betrayed by someone within their own ranks, transformed the rescue operation into something far more dangerous. Colonel Harrison began assembling an extraction team composed entirely of military personnel with no previous connection to CIA operations in Southeast Asia. If there truly was a mole within the agency, they couldn't risk using any operatives who might have been compromised. The technical challenges were staggering. The Golden Triangle region where Mary was supposedly being held encompassed thousands of square miles of dense jungle, remote villages, and territory controlled by various armed groups. Satellite imagery could only reveal so much through the thick canopy, and human intelligence assets in the region had already proven unreliable, possibly compromised. As February turned to March, the Collins family found themselves living in a strange limbo between hope and despair. Robert had quit his State Department job to focus entirely on Mary's case, burning through what remained of their savings and borrowing money from Patricia to stay afloat. Emma began having nightmares again, while Michael started asking questions he had never asked before. "Daddy, if Mummy comes home, will she still know us?" The weight of that question hung over everything the rescue team was planning, because even if they could locate and extract Mary Collins from whatever hell she had endured for the past 2 years, the woman they brought home might be a stranger wearing a familiar face. The third transmission arrived on March 15, 2013, and with it came revelations that would shake the CIA to its core. This message was different from the previous two, transmitted using a frequency-hopping pattern that suggested Mary had gained access to military-grade communication equipment. More disturbing still, the transmission came through during a narrow window when U.S. surveillance satellites were repositioning, indicating that someone with access to classified orbital schedules was helping coordinate her communications. The decoded message contained specific intelligence that only a handful of people could have known. Details about CIA safe houses in Bangkok that had been established after Mary's disappearance, the real names of operatives who had searched for her under deep cover, and operational codes that had been changed multiple times during the investigation. Mary Collins wasn't just alive, she was providing evidence of a security breach that reached into the highest levels of American intelligence operations in Southeast Asia. Director Sarah Chen convened an emergency meeting that included only the most trusted members of her inner circle. The conference room was swept for listening devices 3 times before the meeting began. Chen's hands trembled slightly as she read Mary's decoded message aloud. Handler designation. Phoenix sold my mission details to Zhang Syndicate. Stop payment received, October 20th, 2010. Stop Phoenix, currently feeding real-time intelligence to captors. Stop my location changes every time rescue operation planned. Stop trust only Collins family direct contact stop. The room fell silent. Phoenix was the operational code name for Agent David Brennan, Mary's primary handler, and the man who had designed her final mission to Thailand. Brennan had been with the CIA for 15 years, held a top-secret clearance, and had access to virtually every aspect of Mary's case. He was also the operative who had assured Robert Collins repeatedly that everything possible was being done to find his wife. Agent Marcus Webb, who had worked closely with Brennan during the initial search operations, felt sick as the implications became clear. Every rescue mission they had planned, every surveillance operation they had conducted, every safe house they had established, all of it had been compromised from within. Mary Collins hadn't just been captured, she had been sold to the Zhang Syndicate by someone she trusted implicitly. The psychological operations team, led by Dr. A. Elizabeth Reeves, began reconstructing what Mary's experience must have been like. Captured by criminals who knew exactly who she was, what she was trained to do, and how the CIA would try to rescue her. They had kept her alive not for ransom, but as a source of ongoing intelligence about American operations in the region. "She's been a prisoner for 28 months, Dr. Reeves explained to the team, but she's also been fighting a psychological war against her captors and our own people. The level of mental strength required to maintain operational security while feeding us intelligence through these transmissions, it's extraordinary." Meanwhile, Agent David Brennan continued his normal duties at Langley, attending briefings about Mary's case and offering suggestions for the rescue operations he knew would fail. Security footage later revealed that Brennan had been the source of several leaks about planned CIA activities in Southeast Asia, information that had found its way to criminal organizations throughout the region. Robert Collins received a secure phone call from Director Chen at 2:17 a.m. on March 16th. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes, but its content would haunt Robert for the rest of his life. "Robert, Mary has identified the person who betrayed her mission. It's someone we've all trusted, someone who's been involved in every aspect of trying to find her. We're going to arrest him tomorrow, but Mary is still in immediate danger. Her captors know we're closing in. The arrest of Agent David Brennan sent shockwaves through the intelligence community. Brennan, who had a gambling addiction that had spiraled out of control in the years before Mary's disappearance, had been receiving payments of $50,000 per month from Zhang Syndicate shell companies in exchange for classified information about CIA operations. The financial investigation revealed that Brennan had received his first payment 3 days before Mary Collins departed for Bangkok. He had sold not just her mission details, but the location and timing of every subsequent rescue attempt. Mary Collins had been living in a nightmare designed by someone who had sworn an oath to protect American operatives in the field. If this case has already hooked you, hit the like button. It helps Mary Collins's story reach more people. But Brennan's arrest created a new problem. With their source inside the CIA now compromised, the Zhang Syndicate would have no reason to keep Mary Collins alive. The rescue team had perhaps hours, not days, to locate and extract her, before she became a liability her captors could no longer afford to maintain. Colonel Harrison's extraction team, operating with complete communication silence to prevent any remaining security leaks, began what would become the most dangerous rescue operation in CIA history, a race against time to save an operative who had been betrayed by her own people and had somehow survived to expose the corruption that had destroyed her life. The extraction team deployed from a U.S. military base in the Philippines at 200 hours on March 18, 2013, flying in unmarked helicopters toward the coordinates Mary had provided in her final transmission. Colonel Harrison led a team of 12 Special Forces operatives, none of whom had any previous connection to CIA operations in Southeast Asia. They were flying blind into territory controlled by one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the world, searching for a woman who might not survive the night. The landscape below them was a maze of dense jungle canopy, winding rivers, and small villages connected by dirt roads that became impassable during monsoon season. Intelligence analysts at Langley had identified 3 possible locations where the Zhang Syndicate might be holding Mary, based on radio signal triangulation and satellite thermal imaging that showed structures large enough to serve as prison compounds. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves had briefed the team extensively on what to expect if they found Mary alive. After 28 months of captivity, she would likely be suffering from severe malnutrition, possible physical torture injuries, and psychological trauma that could make her distrust even her rescuers. The team medic carried specialized equipment for treating long-term captivity victims, including medications for infections commonly found in jungle prison camps. As the helicopters approached the first target location, a cluster of buildings near a tributary of the Mekong River, Colonel Harrison received an encrypted message that made his blood run cold. Agent David Brennan, despite being in FBI custody, had somehow managed to get word to his Zhang Syndicate contacts that a rescue operation was underway. "The bastards burned us even from his jail cell," Harrison muttered into his headset. "We have to assume they're moving her right now." The first compound was empty, except for evidence of recent habitation, camp beds, cooking equipment, and radio gear that was still warm to the touch. But in one of the smaller buildings, Sergeant Maria Santos found something that confirmed they were on the right track. A piece of fabric torn from a CIA-issued field jacket, along with scratches in the wooden wall that spelled out MC and a date from 6 months earlier. Mary Collins had been here, and she had left a message. The second location, deeper in the jungle near the Myanmar border, showed signs of more permanent occupation. The extraction team observed armed guards patrolling the perimeter, vehicles coming and going, and what appeared to be holding facilities designed for multiple prisoners. But thermal imaging showed no signs of American captives, and a careful reconnaissance revealed that this was primarily a drug processing facility. As dawn approached and the team's window for aerial extraction began to close, Colonel Harrison made the difficult decision to investigate the third location, a remote monastery that intelligence analysts suspected had been taken over by the Zhang Syndicate for use as a communications center and high-security prison. The monastery sat on a hillside overlooking the Salween River, its ancient stone walls and modern radio antennas creating an incongruous blend of spiritual architecture and criminal enterprise. Harrison's team observed the facility for 30 minutes through high-powered scopes, counting at least 15 armed guards and noting the presence of sophisticated electronic countermeasures that would make communication with their support team impossible. But Sergeant Santos, using thermal imaging equipment, detected what appeared to be a human figure in the basement level of the main building, someone who showed the heat signature patterns consistent with prolonged malnutrition and restricted movement. "Colonel, we've got a possible match on the target building basement level southeast corner," Santos whispered into her throat microphone. "Single individual appears to be restrained or confined to a small space." The assault began at 05:47 hours, just as the jungle dawn was breaking through the canopy. Harrison's team moved with the precision of operators who knew they had one chance to succeed. The guards at the monastery had grown complacent after months of routine, and the Americans reached the main building before the alarm was raised. But the Zhang Syndicate had prepared for this possibility. As the extraction team breached the basement level, they found themselves facing not just armed resistance, but a building rigged with explosive devices designed to eliminate evidence and prisoners if the facility was ever compromised. In a stone cell, barely large enough for one person to lie down, they found Mary Collins. The woman who had been one of the CIA's most capable operatives was barely recognizable. Weighing perhaps 90 pounds, with hair that had gone prematurely grey and eyes that reflected 28 months of unimaginable endurance, Mary Collins looked up at her rescuers with an expression that mixed hope, disbelief, and a wariness born of too many false hopes. "Are you real?" she whispered in a voice made hoarse by months of minimal use. Sergeant Santos knelt beside the cell as her teammates cut through the restraints. "Ma'am, we're United States military. We're here to take you home to your family." Mary Collins, the woman who had survived betrayal, captivity, and the kind of psychological warfare that breaks most people within weeks, began to cry, not from pain, but from the impossible realization that she might actually see her children again. The monastery erupted into chaos as Colonel Harrison's extraction team fought their way through corridors filled with armed Zhang Syndicate operatives. The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed off ancient stone walls, while Sergeant Santos carefully lifted Mary Collins from the cell that had been her world for 28 months. Mary's legs, weakened by prolonged confinement and malnutrition, could barely support her weight, but her mind remained sharp enough to provide crucial intelligence. "The basement is rigged," she whispered urgently to Santos as explosions began rocking the building's upper levels. "Zhang Wei installed charges throughout the foundation. If they activate the dead man's switch," her words were cut off by a massive explosion from the monastery's eastern wing. The Zhang Syndicate's contingency plan was now in motion. If they couldn't maintain control of their high-value prisoner, they would ensure that no evidence of their operations survived. More importantly, they would eliminate the woman who could testify about Agent David Brennan's betrayal and the full extent of their penetration into American intelligence operations. Colonel Harrison's voice crackled through the team's communication system. "We have multiple explosions. Structure compromising, extraction window closing fast. All teams to rally point Alpha, 60 seconds. But 60 seconds felt like an eternity, as Santos half-carried, half-dragged Mary through corridors that were filling with smoke and debris. Mary's physical condition was worse than even Dr. Reeves had predicted. Her captors had kept her alive, but they had systematically broken down her body through calculated malnutrition and medical neglect. "Leave me," Mary gasped as they reached a staircase blocked by fallen beams. "I'm slowing you down. Get the intelligence back to Langley." Santos looked into the eyes of a woman who had spent over 2 years fighting to survive and had never stopped thinking like an operative, even in her darkest moments. "Ma'am, respectfully, that's not how we do business. We all go home together." The sergeant used explosive charges to clear their path, while other team members engaged Zhang Syndicate fighters who were determined to prevent Mary's escape. The battle was fierce but brief. Harrison's operators had trained for exactly this type of close-quarters combat in hostile territory, while their opponents were primarily used to intimidating prisoners and civilian populations. As they reached the monastery's main courtyard, Mary Collins saw sunlight for the first time in months. The extraction helicopters were already inbound, their pilots pushing the aircraft to maximum speed, despite heavy ground fire from remaining Syndicate positions. Mary looked up at the morning sky over the Thai-Myanmar border and felt something she had almost forgotten how to feel: hope. The helicopter extraction was a masterpiece of military precision. While one aircraft provided covering fire, the other landed long enough for the team to load Mary onto a stretcher equipped with IV fluids and emergency medical equipment. The entire operation, from initial breach to wheels up, had lasted less than 18 minutes. But as the helicopters climbed towards safe airspace, Mary Collins grabbed Colonel Harrison's arm with surprising strength. "The intelligence," she said urgently. "Everything I learned about Zhang's operations, about other compromised assets in the agency, it's all in my memory. But there are other prisoners down there, Americans, aid workers, journalists. We can't just leave them." Harrison's expression was grim as he radioed back to command. The monastery was now fully engulfed in flames, and satellite imagery showed Zhang Syndicate reinforcements converging on the area. A second rescue operation would be impossible without massive military support that could trigger an international incident. Mary Collins had been saved, but the cost of her freedom was the knowledge that others remained trapped in the hell she had finally escaped. As the helicopters flew toward the U.S. military base in the Philippines, Mary stared out the window at the jungle that had been her prison, knowing that her fight was far from over. The woman who had disappeared as a CIA operative was returning as something else entirely, a witness to betrayal, a survivor of systematic torture, and a living repository of intelligence that would reshape American operations throughout Southeast Asia. But first, she had to figure out how to be a mother to children who had grown up believing she was dead. The reunion between Mary Collins and her family took place at Walter Reed Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland, under the kind of security typically reserved for heads of state. After 3 weeks of medical treatment and psychological evaluation, Mary had regained some of her physical strength, but the woman who walked into the hospital's family meeting room bore little resemblance to the confident CIA operative who had kissed her children goodbye in October 2010. Robert Collins had prepared Emma and Michael for months, working with child psychologists to help them understand that their mother might be different, that she might need time to remember how to be part of their family again, but nothing could have prepared him for the moment when Mary looked at her 12-year-old daughter and 10-year-old son, children who had been 8 and 6 when she disappeared, and whispered, "You've grown so much. I've missed so much." Emma, now almost as tall as her mother, approached cautiously. The confident little girl who had once climbed into Mary's lap to hear bedtime stories was now a cautious pre-teenager who had learned to protect herself from disappointment. "Mom," she said tentatively, "is it really you?" Mary's response broke everyone's heart. "I hope so, sweetheart. I'm still figuring that out myself." The psychological evaluation had revealed the full extent of what Mary had endured. Beyond the physical imprisonment, Jiang Wei's organization had employed sophisticated psychological warfare techniques designed to break down her sense of identity and reality. They had shown her fabricated evidence that her family had moved on, that the CIA had declared her dead and stopped looking, that her capture had been part of a planned operation to eliminate an operative who knew too much. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, the grief counselor who had helped the family cope with Mary's disappearance, now found herself helping them navigate an equally complex challenge, learning to be a family again with a woman who had survived trauma beyond most people's comprehension. "Mary has what we call complex PTSD," Dr. Martinez explained to Robert during one of their sessions. "She's not just dealing with captivity trauma, she's processing years of psychological manipulation designed to make her question everything she believed about herself and her relationships." The children struggled to understand why their mother sometimes seemed frightened by normal household sounds, why she hoarded food in her bedroom, why she would wake up screaming from nightmares about people who looked like friends but weren't really friends. Michael, in particular, had difficulty accepting that the woman in their house was the same person he had talked to in his imagination for years. Meanwhile, the legal and intelligence consequences of Mary's rescue were reshaping the CIA's operations throughout Southeast Asia. Agent David Brennan's trial had revealed a network of corruption that extended far beyond his individual betrayal. Mary's debriefings identified at least 6 other agency assets who had been compromised by Zhang Syndicate intelligence operations. The Zhang Syndicate itself had not survived Mary's escape intact. Without their high-value American prisoner and with their operations exposed, the organization had fractured into smaller criminal groups that lacked the coordination and intelligence capabilities that had made them so dangerous. Jiang Wei himself had disappeared, presumably into the same jungle labyrinth where he had held Mary Collins prisoner. But perhaps the most significant consequence was Mary's decision, announced during a closed session with Director Sarah Chen that she would never return to operational duty with the CIA. The woman who had once been one of the agency's most capable operatives could no longer trust the institution that had failed to protect her from betrayal by one of its own. "I gave you 15 years of my life," Mary told Chen during their final meeting. "You gave me 28 months in hell. We're done." Instead, Mary Collins made a different choice, one that would ultimately prove more powerful than any covert operation she had ever conducted. She decided to testify publicly about the systematic failures that had led to her capture and the ongoing problems within America's intelligence community. Her testimony before a closed congressional committee lasted 14 hours and resulted in the most comprehensive review of CIA security protocols since the agency's founding. But more importantly, it established Mary Collins as an advocate for intelligence operatives who had been abandoned by the system they had sworn to serve. The Collins family slowly began to heal, though they would never return to the life they had known before October 2010. They moved from their Arlington home to a small farm in rural Virginia, where Mary could have the space and quiet she needed to continue her psychological recovery. Emma and Michael learned to love a mother who was different from the one they remembered, but who brought with her a strength and resilience that would shape their own characters for the rest of their lives. Robert Collins, who had spent nearly 3 years living in a state of suspended grief, finally began to understand that some losses change you so fundamentally that healing doesn't mean returning to who you were. It means becoming someone new. 5 years after Mary Collins walked out of that monastery in the Thai jungle, she stood before a packed auditorium at Georgetown University, delivering the keynote address at a conference on intelligence reform. The woman who had once operated in the shadows now spoke publicly about the systemic failures that had nearly cost her life and had destroyed too many other families like hers. "My name is Mary Collins," she began, her voice strong and clear. "5 years ago, the Central Intelligence Agency declared me dead. Today I'm here to talk about the deaths that could have been prevented and the lives that can still be saved." The audience, a mixture of intelligence professionals, congressional staffers, and family members of other missing operatives, listened in complete silence as Mary detailed not just her own ordeal, but the broader patterns of institutional failure that had enabled Agent David Brennan's betrayal. Emma Collins, now 17 and preparing for college, sat in the front row with her father and brother. The shy 12-year-old who had been afraid to trust that her mother was really home had grown into a confident young woman who planned to study international law, inspired by her mother's advocacy work. Michael, at 15, had channeled his early trauma into a passion for computer science and digital security. He had spent countless hours learning about encryption and secure communications, driven by a desire to ensure that operatives like his mother would never again be betrayed by compromised technology. Robert Collins, who had left the State Department to become a private consultant on intelligence oversight, watched his wife with a mixture of pride and amazement. The woman who had returned to them broken and suspicious had transformed her trauma into a force for institutional change that was already saving lives. Mary's advocacy organization, the Intelligence Accountability Project, had successfully pushed for new protocols, requiring multiple layers of verification before operatives could be deployed to high-risk areas. They had also established support networks for families of missing intelligence personnel and created whistleblower protections for operatives who reported security concerns. But perhaps Mary's most important achievement was simpler and more personal. She had learned to be a mother again. The woman who had hoarded food and startled at sudden sounds had gradually rediscovered the joy of making pancakes on Saturday mornings and helping with homework around the kitchen table. The nightmares never completely went away, but they became less frequent and less intense. Dr. Martinez continued to work with the family, helping them navigate the ongoing challenges of trauma recovery and post-traumatic growth. Agent David Brennan was serving a life sentence in federal prison, his gambling debts and moral compromises having cost not just Mary Collins her freedom, but dozens of other operatives their safety. His case had become a textbook study in how personal vulnerabilities could be exploited by foreign intelligence services and criminal organizations. The Zhang syndicate had indeed collapsed after Mary's escape, but Zhang Wei himself remained at large. Intelligence reports suggested he had fled to Myanmar's remote eastern provinces, where he continued to operate human trafficking networks on a smaller scale. Mary sometimes wondered if he still thought about the American woman who had outsmarted his psychological warfare and lived to expose his operations. As Mary concluded her Georgetown address, she looked out at an audience that included CIA Director Sarah Chen, now a strong supporter of the reforms Mary had advocated. The relationship between the two women would never return to the trust they had once shared, but it had evolved into something more valuable, a professional partnership focused on ensuring that no other operative would suffer Mary's fate. "My family lost 3 years of our lives together," Mary said as she concluded her speech. "Other families have lost much more, but we have the power to ensure that those losses have meaning, that they lead to changes that protect the people who risk everything to keep our country safe." The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes, but the moment that mattered most to Mary Collins came afterward, when Emma and Michael joined her on stage and Emma said simply, "We're proud of you, Mom." The Collins family had learned that some traumas are too profound to ever fully heal, but they can be transformed into purpose. Mary's disappearance had shattered their world, but her return and her refusal to let that suffering be meaningless had created something stronger than what they had lost. 15 years after Mary Collins disappeared into the shadows of Southeast Asia, her story had become a testament to the power of survival, the importance of institutional accountability, and the resilience of families who refuse to give up hope. Subscribe to our channel to explore more archived and disturbing cases across America. Thank you for following Mary Collins' story. See you in the next video.